Before Michelle O'Connell went on a trip to Hawaii in 2009, she wrote a letter to her daughter. Michelle planned on skydiving while she was on vacation, and she wanted to document how much she loved 4-year-old Alex, just in case.
She was the best mom. She was the best aunt. She just loved life. She loved her daughter. She lived for Alexis.
24-year-old Michelle's devotion to her daughter is just one reason her family and friends insist she never would have killed herself. But there are lots of reasons. She'd just gotten a promotion at work and was supposed to start her new job the next day. She told her family she planned to leave her boyfriend and was, in fact, packing to leave. And just minutes before a bullet ended her life, she texted her sister that she was coming to pick up Alex.
Please get some into my eyes. What's going on? Please, my girlfriend, I think she just shot herself.
Just after 11:20 p.m. on September 2nd, 2010, Michelle's boyfriend, St. Johns County Sheriff's Deputy Jeremy Banks, called police. He told dispatchers she was unconscious and bleeding.
Oh, there's blood coming out of everywhere, please.
So what did happen to Michelle that night? Surprisingly, there is very little agreement, even among the experts. The St. Johns County medical examiner initially ruled her death a suicide, but later changed his mind.
Well, I became convinced that it was probably a homicide.
Are you Dr. Hoban?
Dr. Frederick Hoban declined to be interviewed on camera, but he did allow us to make an audio recording of our interview. When we asked him what he thinks today about what happened that night, he admits he doesn't know what happened.
The best I can do now is to say I don't know.
Dr. Jerry Finley, a crime scene analyst hired by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to review the case, concluded that many elements of Michelle's death were suspicious. He also determined it was extremely unlikely that right-handed Michelle would use her weaker left hand to hold the gun, as she would have had to in order for the bullet casings to land where they did. Finley, pictured here in FDLE's report, wouldn't talk on camera, saying the case had become too political. But in his report, he questioned why the weapon had no trace of blood on it, even though blood was spattered on Michelle's hands, arms, and legs. Finley also found it suspicious that the gun, which was Deputy Banks' duty weapon, didn't have any of his DNA or fingerprints on it, even though he'd worn it to work that day. Finley concluded the evidence in the case, though not consistent with a suicide, was consistent with a homicide. The state attorney's office believes Michelle killed herself, and 2 other medical examiners who reviewed the case agreed. But the Florida Department of Law Enforcement believes the case was a homicide. And in March, after Special Prosecutor Brad King announced he would not pursue the case, the agency sent a letter asking him to reconsider.
I would hope that Brad King would respond to this. In my deep gut,
Michelle's sister agrees.
I believe we deserve a grand jury.
There is nothing in this young man's past to suggest he's even capable of this type of conduct. He has not abused anybody, and he sure as hell didn't kill anyone.
This is Jeremy's attorney, Mac McLeod.
He was as distraught as anybody was about this death.
Jeremy Banks didn't want to talk to us for this story, but he admitted to police that he and Michelle had a tumultuous relationship. During the year they dated, they fought often, and she frequently threatened to leave. On at least a couple of occasions, he told police, that anger turned physical.
She threw a chair down and she said, "I hate you, Jeremy Banks." She ran at me. That's when I grabbed her arms and I put her on the ground and I held her there.
Michelle's mother, Patty O'Connell, long suspected abuse in their relationship.
I went to counseling through the sheriff's office. I said, my daughter's being abused. My granddaughter's being abused. Well, we can't do nothing about Michelle, but we'll take care of Alexis. And I said, okay. And then a couple days later, Michelle's dead. She's gone.
But Banks has insisted all along that Michelle's death was a suicide, and his story has never wavered.
I mean, one of the things that liars don't do is they're not consistent. And Jeremy, knowing what occurred, has always been consistent. This issue of
Jeremy's attorney, Mac McLeod, observes that 2 other medical examiners and the special prosecutor all determined Michelle's death was a suicide. He points to several desperate-sounding text messages Michelle sent that night. He also notes that paramedics found her jeans pockets stuffed with painkillers belonging to Deputy Banks, though no drugs were found in her system. But what may be the most unsettling piece of evidence didn't emerge until months after Michelle's death. Two female witnesses who lived a few hundred yards from the house where Michelle died maintain they heard a woman screaming for help. The women declined our interview requests, but both signed sworn statements and passed polygraph tests.
Once they move out into their
St. Johns County Sheriff's Office spokesperson Chuck Mulligan says the agency has been torn apart by the case, and not just because Jeremy Banks is a deputy there. At the time of Michelle's death, both her brother and her mother worked at the sheriff's office.
Because there's been a lot of rumors, there's been new information that arrives months after the case, and it's been very trying on all of the individuals.
May of 2010.
Eventually, says Michelle's mother, Patty O'Connell, working there just became too stressful.
And that is a couple months prior to her death.
And I cried and cried because I wanted to tell so many people in that office. My daughter did not kill herself. And it was just like all for almost close to 2 years, I had to be quiet. I couldn't say anything about how I felt about my daughter. I had to work there and act like nothing ever happened.
Patty O'Connell ultimately quit. Her son, Deputy Scott O'Connell, was fired in part because of his angry reaction to the prosecutor's decision not to prosecute.
Very complicated set of issues in this case. In 25 years at the Sheriff's Office, I've never seen a independent investigation like this go for as long, have as many people involved, have as many experts involved, and still have questions in the end.
But despite the family's pleas and the lingering questions, after almost 2 years on administrative leave, Deputy Jeremy Banks returned to work 6 weeks ago. Whether he'll be able to do his job effectively remains to be seen.
The biggest problem Jeremy has is this. This.